For over a decade, California has led the nation in climate change legislation, and it's been a bipartisan effort, with support from Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and Democratic Governor Jerry Brown. What are the goals of the state's climate change laws, and what impact will they have on Californians generally, and California businesses in particular? We'll ask the author of the state's key climate change laws, State Senator Fran Pavley, and one of California's business leaders, Rob Lapsley, president of the California Business Roundtable. California's climate change legislation, too little too late, or too much too soon?
Additional funding for the Maddy report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. Over the last decade, California has led the nation in enacting laws dealing with climate change. Our guest is the author behind that legislation, Senator Fran Pavley from Los Angeles. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So you've been called the pioneer of climate change movement. You've authored laws on reducing vehicle emissions in 2002, landmark 2006 legislation, AB 32, that required the reduction of greenhouse gases to 1990 levels by 2020. And then most recently, 2016 legislation, SB 32, that cut emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. That's a lot of legislation. Why did you pick this particular area of public policy to focus on?
Well, I think it was because of my background. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley during those horrible smoggy days where I remember as a child not being able to go recess, and the main contributor was cars. Cars cause smog. Smog is unhealthy. Then, fast forward, I went to Fresno State, also has problems with air pollution and it affects children's health. So that's been my passion and interest in tying vehicle emissions, and there's a direct link between criteria air pollutants and climate change.
Yeah, my brother lived in Los Angeles during the late 70s, early 80s, and I remember him telling me you couldn't see downtown. It was so polluted, but things have improved pretty dramatically since then. So AB 32, considered groundbreaking legislation in 2006, was the state's first major piece of climate change legislation. Former Governor Schwarzenegger, I can't say it in his voice, but he called it the most powerful environmental law, period. What were the major provisions of AB 32?
Well, I think the three that resonate with the public the most was the tailpipe emission bill that you referenced, and that's making all cars more fuel efficient, giving customers a broader choice of vehicles. That's why you see in the road now traditional vehicles, but also those hybrids or electric cars or hydrogen fuel cell. And so that's part of it. Also part of it is really investing in energy efficiency. That's sort of the low-hanging fruit. That's where you can get the most greenhouse gas emissions reductions for the least cost. So energy efficiency in appliances. It was very controversial to put an appliance standard on refrigerators. Who knew?
And now,
they said it would be too expensive. Other states wouldn't want California's model. Now other states all want California's model on energy efficient refrigerators, and it's saving homeowners money on their energy bill.
Right. You know, instead of mandating regulations, so AB 32 had something kind of interesting. They established something called cap and trade. Can you briefly describe California's cap and trade program?
Do we have a few hours? No. A cap means what it does. We first of all put a cap on emissions and we're rolling them back to 1990 levels of reduction. That's the market signal we want to send. Now we could have done that through a straight regulatory approach.
Just kind of a mandated, you do
all
this.
Major polluters, right, would have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Or we can say, yes, if you're a major polluter and you can't reduce those emissions, it's not cost effective. There's a different approach. You can then purchase what's called allowances so that the government can invest in greenhouse gas emission reductions maybe somewhere else. Could be by providing rebates to middle class vehicle drivers in their new cars or energy efficiency in someone's homes. So it was a way to either be mandated strictly through command and control, regulated to reduce your emissions, or if you cannot, for whatever reason, it's not cost effective, it's not technologically feasible, you can sort of what I call pay to pollute. Contribute money into this account that will be expended thoughtfully around the state of California for the express purpose of reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
The idea behind cap and trade was kind of interesting, is you let companies and individuals be creative as to how they're going to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, as opposed to telling them this is what you have to do. So all that creativity comes out and you find more effective ways to deal with the problem.
And the businesses wanted this. This concept of cap and trade came from the business community, not just California businesses, but national businesses.
Well, let me ask you, it's been 10 years since AB 32 became law. Has it accomplished what you had hoped it would accomplish?
In almost every category, absolutely. What we look at overall, have we reduced greenhouse gas emissions? Can we quantify that? Yes, we can. They've reduced considerably. We will meet our 2020 targets. And has it been done in a cost-effective manner? Has our economy improved while we've been reducing emissions? Yes, it's substantially improved over the last 20 years, despite the recession.
So it hasn't hurt the economy like some people feared?
It not only hasn't hurt the economy, it's sent that market signal to new businesses to invest in places, even like Fresno. We are seeing a variety of solar companies come into Fresno, but areas all over the state where they're being profitable, and they say it's because of our policies, not in spite of our policies, but because of them.
Well, let me ask you this. PPIC had a survey that shows that the partisan divide on climate change has gotten even greater since 2006, since AB 32 was passed. Why is that?
I would lay some of the blame on Washington, D.C. I'm not sure why everything has to be so partisan back there. I'll tell you, in 2002, I was getting support letters on my tailpipe emission bill from John McCain and Republicans. We had Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signing AB 32. We've always had a few brave Republican legislators vote for these bills, renewable energy standards, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's because of powerful special interest money. It's hard. Sometimes transition is hard, and as we change from an economy based on fossil fuels like coal and oil to a new, cleaner energy future, some people don't want that transition, and they don't want that change, and they're using their lobbying power to affect
and it just could be that the partisan nature of politics on many topics is just, this is one of the topics that it's become very highly partisan. But anyway, I appreciate the background on the state's climate change legislation. Well, up next, what about the new legislative attempts to expand California's climate change legislation? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Senator Fran Pavley, the author of AB 32 and now the author of SB 32, the state's new climate change law that comes on the heels of previous climate change legislation and efforts. You know, what is in, so we got this new law, SB 32, passed by the legislature, signed by Governor Brown. What are the major provisions of SB 32? How does it expand AB 32?
What it does, it builds on AB 32. Those existing policies like energy efficiency and cleaner cars, but we'll have to build on them to achieve even greater reduction targets as envisioned. So one thing we're doing is really ramping up renewable energy. By 2030, we want everyone's energy mix to be 50% renewable. Wind, solar, geothermal. We're thinking in-state production of energy is smart for several reasons. It's good for the environment. It also creates in-state jobs. We don't have to be dependent on out-of-state. We're not going to be gamed, for example, by Enron again and what happened to the energy deregulation. So that's going to be an incredibly important piece of that. But we're going to need some new technologies and new ideas to meet these reduction targets. But by passing SB 32, it's now in statute, we're sending those market signals to investors, and we think the innovators, clean technology experts are going to be very engaged. I've spoken to biofuel companies in 3 locations in the state. They are now hiring new people. They're expanding. They know there will be a market.
You know, business wants predictability. They want to know if it's going to be there, so they're going to, if they invest, there's a reason for them to invest, so it probably gave them the right signal. Let me ask you this, though. You know, the state's often accused of spending money so fast, it's unbelievable. But the opposite actually has been true with cap and trade funds. For several years, money was being collected, about $1 billion, and not being spent until recently. Recently, that logjam was broken, and the funds are now starting to be spent. Why was there a logjam, and where's the money now being spent?
The money is being spent in a variety of categories, some of it in the transit area, inner city transit and things, some in weatherization, a lot of it for having to do with vehicle rebates and things like that for all income levels. A large amount of money is also being expended in ways that benefit particularly disadvantaged communities.
Places like the San Joaquin Valley.
Exactly like the San Joaquin Valley. There's places all over California, but the San Joaquin Valley should benefit proportionally very well in the investment of greenhouse gas emissions. And there's some great legislators from this area who will be championing that.
You know, recently, though, the state and cap auction has brought in less money than they anticipated. Is there a problem here with cap and trade? If there is, can it be saved?
Well, I think part of the problems was twofold. One, there was a point in time that the investors in cap and trade and everyone involved with cap and trade didn't know if these policies would go on past 2020.
Right.
If the policies weren't going to continue,
because AB 32 said 2020
expired 2020.
Right.
So now with SB 32 being signed into law, they now have the particular, it's 2030, it's 14 years away. I would suggest that there may be then now more willingness for people to purchase these allowances. A lot of them have banked them over the last few years. I think they wanted to wait and see if they don't need any more past 2020, then why purchase anymore? So I think this will be helpful into having a more favorable outcome, perhaps in November, December, the next time we have an auction.
Okay, so the signal's now been set. Let me kind of switch gears a little bit. California's Little Hoover Commission did a report a while ago that suggested while a lot has been done to limit greenhouse gases, much less has been done to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Do you agree? Do you think the state should be doing more to deal with the impacts of climate change?
We have to do all of the above, frankly, and a lot of the things we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions also is a way to adapt to a changing climate. For example, let's take drought. That's one of the characteristics of climate change, less snowpack or less rainfall, we're going to have less water. Water conservation measures, that's a way to adapt, but it's also a way to reduce water and energy needs. 20% of all of our energy use is moving, treating, and heating water. Can we do things to make that not as energy intensive? Investing in energy efficiency. So there's a wide variety of strategies. Should we be making plans right now, whether it's in the Delta or infrastructure improvements, for example, airports that are in low-lying areas along our coast, like San Francisco Bay? Absolutely. Thoughtful land use planning is absolutely critical, so local governments need to step up.
Well, let me ask you one last question in this segment. That is, there's the major arguments against California's climate change legislation or effort has been it puts the state at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis other states or even nations. Business groups, for example, say it's going to cripple their industries. What is your response to that?
We're finding so many success stories here. It's hard to find a lot of cases where that is true. We have more people hired in this new clean, sustainable field in jobs that are well-paying jobs. This is the future. You can invest, perhaps, if you want, in coal-fired power plants in other states. Most people are not investing anymore in coal-fired power plants. They know that's a thing of the past. So they have moved to this new energy space. And what we have to do in California is be very thoughtful in the transition, work with our existing businesses to make them competitive in the marketplace. We're sensitive to that. But I'm also personally working in other states. Other states now are really investing in this policy.
Following California's lead, well, I want to thank State Senator Fran Pavley for joining us. Up next, what is the business community's response to the state's climate change legislation? Is it an obstacle or an opportunity? That conversation next. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. So what does the business community think of California's climate change efforts? Rob Lapsley, the president of the California Business Roundtable, joins us to talk about the potential impact on the California economy. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
Supporters say that California's climate change legislation is essentially kind of, you can have it all. Strong economy and a more sustainable environment. What do you think?
So our response to that is that it has yet to be proven. So the California business community has been supportive of trying to achieve the climate change goals. If the science is there, recognize we have a obviously huge role to play, and we want to see a goal established that's achievable, but that would be able to provide balance to California's economy. So the most important thing for everyone to recognize right now is that we are only a couple years into this. The bill might have been passed 10 years ago, AB 32, but we're just really still starting the implementation of that. And we do not have enough information yet to truly understand the intended and unintended consequences of this policy, much less try and understand where it goes in the future.
You know, kind of ties into my next question. That is, you've said that this new Senate Bill 32 was not drafted with an eye toward the lessons learned with AB 32. So what were the lessons that were ignored?
Well, first and foremost is we yet do not have enough data on AB 32 on what the real impacts are, particularly to the average Californian. Case in point, that prices are going up for gasoline, prices are going up for electricity as a result of our climate change policies. That is hitting the average Californian right in the pocketbook, not to mention the costs that it's impacting on California businesses. We pay double the electricity price for manufacturing facilities in California than anywhere else in the country, at a minimum.
Well, what about the argument that buildings are going to become more efficient? So yes, maybe the rates may go up, but you're using less electricity.
Prove it. No,
you want to see the data.
I'm kidding. So this has to be now, we've set the goal, it has to be a data-driven argument. We need to be able to understand exactly what we're achieving, what actual greenhouse gas reductions we're getting, at what cost, and then how is it truly impacting the average middle-class Californian so we can craft the best possible policy moving forward. We're leading the world. We got to show the world we can have the best policy. And they're making the next generation decisions before we actually have good data. That's our concern.
You know, one of the interesting things here is they're saying that 70 to 80% of the job is already done. But that does mean you still got 20 or 30% left to go. And is one of the arguments here that we've already addressed the low-hanging fruit, and so now it becomes a case of diminishing returns, where it's become more expensive to get that next 20 or 30% reduction?
Mark, that's putting it exactly right. That's well said. And so every time you have a policy, the first couple of years you can do some of the easier things that people aren't going to really see or feel. Sure, it's great to go out and get all this solar. Okay, but the next round of decision making, I was just looking at it literally this morning of what CARB is talking about at their meeting today. And the next round shows that the main growth under this policy is going to be potentially in auto manufacturing. There's going to be huge declines in cement and all these other manufacturing areas that literally is going to drive business to other states. And it's in CARB's own discussions.
Yeah, it seems like there are going to be winners and losers as this plays out. The ARB, speaking of the ARB, there was a lot of discussion last time about what their role should be. There was an attempt in a companion piece to SB 32, that is AB 197, sorry the numbers here, but it really focused on more legislative oversight of the ARB. Do you think that they struck the appropriate balance?
Well, it was an improvement for sure. So ARB obviously has a huge role to play, but they should not be making major economic decisions for all of California's future by themselves. That's what our argument was. And we would still like to see actually greater oversight on CARB by the fact that any major decision surrounding climate change, or frankly any other major regulatory decision of, say, like $100 to $200 million or more statewide, should actually go back to the legislature for final approval. Let's make sure that there's additional layers to get it right. And that's not, when you talk to the average Californian, an unreasonable concept.
Yeah, some polling data seems to support that. Yeah. Well, up next, we're going to talk about California's cap and trade program and what comes next in the battle for climate change, or over climate change. That conversation in a moment. This is Mark Kepler with the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Rob Lapsley with the California Business Roundtable about California's landmark climate change program. SB 32 they recently passed was pretty far-reaching, but it was silent on a pretty big issue, and that was cap and trade. is there a kind of a cause and effect with the legal limbo that cap and trade is currently in, and the auctions now that are coming in well below expectations?
Yes, without a doubt. And what happened with cap and trade originally, the business community supports a market-based mechanism. We think as we're in the infancy still of this whole area of trying to address climate change in California, that this is the right approach to get started to see if we can get the real emission reductions. But most importantly, when they passed cap and trade originally, it's a tax, and they needed a two-thirds
That's the question.
vote.
Yeah, that is the question. But they always say, if you go back and look at this, oh, this is not a tax.
Yes, and now it's being litigated because of that very issue, and because it didn't pass from a two-thirds vote, a court case is working its way through that will actually have an opinion very quickly next 2 months or so at the appellate level that will make that final ruling. And because of that, it's impacted the amount of credits that are trading, and as a result, it's gone way down to almost just what, $20 million.
Yeah, quite a bit less.
Which is not makes it an effective mechanism.
Yeah, $20 million only in Sacramento. $20 million, not so much.
But now when it started at $500 million.
Right. Governor Brown's thinking that he actually has the leverage with this legislation to continue cap and trade, because he says, listen, if SB 32 targets are there and we don't have cap and trade, it's going to be this command and control. Command being we'll tell you what targets to hit, and control will tell you how to hit those targets, which means business loses flexibility. So he's thinking if that's the alternative, business is going to go for cap and trade. Do you agree?
So yes, predominantly, but let me give you the other side of that argument. So one, it has to be a cap and trade that's effective. It has to work. Number two, the alternative to a cap and trade is what's called a carbon tax. That's actually on a statewide ballot up in Washington State for the election in November. Then you can apply a carbon tax to essentially anything, regarding business, individuals. It's all in how it's crafted by the legislature and how it would work. You could put it in at the wellhead. You could put it in at the pump. There's all different ways.
It's that three-letter word tax. I think that would probably cap and trade doesn't sound, frankly, like a tax. And you call a carbon tax, it's in the definition.
Well, cap and trade, ideally is a market-based mechanism that allows for, credits to be traded at a level that provides balance in this. You only have to buy what you need. And by doing that, you're reducing your emissions, which the business community, I can tell you unequivocally, is working hard to reduce their emissions to be able to meet these the climate change goals.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Senator Fran Pavley earlier in the show, and that is some recent surveys show that the partisan divide over climate change has gotten even greater since AB 32 was enacted a decade ago. Why do you think that is?
So, it's interesting. I see data all over the board. I've seen some of that, that the Republicans are more skeptical, if you will, on some of the climate change data where the Democrats are not. I've also seen data where it actually is kind of in the middle, where both of them recognize that there most likely is a problem and that it needs to be addressed. So it seems to be kind of a cyclical thing right now with what's happening in the news, depending upon when you take the poll, depending upon informing the opinion. But Republicans tend to be more skeptical of huge regulatory efforts from government in general, and I think anything regarding this is also a reflection of that.
Well, let me ask you this one last question. That is, where's the future of climate change policy? Where is this going? Is there a way that there can be a mutual advantage here for both business and environmentalists in terms of climate change actions?
Yes, and that comes with the intersection, ideally, of what they call a more green economy or green jobs. Now, from the Business Roundtable standpoint, we are tracking very closely the green jobs that are supposed to be happening under this policy. And right now I can tell you unequivocally that as we track this very closely, the most that we have seen to date is at best 2% of all of California jobs. We have roughly 17 million jobs in California. 2% of those at most are green job. So it is not growing anywhere near what it should be growing to date. That's again one of our causes for concern. And they also pay much less than jobs that have paid in the oil and gas sector, that have paid in the manufacturing sector, sectors that we're losing jobs in because of our
We'll have
uncompetitiveness.
to take a close look at that. Well, I want to thank Rob Lapsley with the California Business Roundtable for joining us, also California State Senator Fran Pavley. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can follow the Maddy Institute on Twitter and Facebook, or you can log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.